What a shakeup we have going on in the world of college football right now. News broke earlier this week. I'm sure if you haven't heard by now, I'm sure you've heard by now. Texas, Oklahoma want out of the Big 12. We got that. We got other college news to talk about on this hot Saturday evening on the Hateful Hitman podcast. Welcome in. Thank you for joining me. A lot's been going on, and I wanted to give my 2-cent take on it. So I figured it was time. I was going to do an instant reaction pod 2 days ago, but now I've kind of let the dust settle a little bit, and I've seen some feedback, and I've seen some things that I really think are interesting, and I'd like to discuss them. But we'll start with, it seems a huge number of teams in the SEC are going to vote in favor of Texas and Oklahoma joining that conference. If you follow me on social media, there's been some conversation about it, and my soon-to-be son-in-law, I think he said it best. He's an SEC guy. He's a Gator fan, and so, you know, he kind of has a little bit more of a finger on the pulse of the SEC than I do. But he said it best in one of the posts he made on social media when he said, the SEC doesn't need Texas and Oklahoma. Texas and Oklahoma need the SEC. That's spot on. That is exactly right, and that is the reason why, you know, they want out of the Big 12. Adding those two teams to the SEC, in my humble opinion, puts the nail in the coffin of the Big 12. There's not much left to get excited about when your two top teams perennially are leaving. Now, I know there's talk about Iowa State, and they are really good. You know, and what Matt Campbell has done with that team over the past couple of seasons is really good. But all in all, when you look at the Big 12 conference, you think of a few teams. You think of Texas. You think of Oklahoma. And every once again, you'll sprinkle in some Oklahoma State. You'll sprinkle in some TCU from time to time. But all in all, those are the two main draws in that conference. Now, West Virginia joined the Big 12 a few years ago. I love West Virginia. They are my second favorite college team. That's where Bobby Bowden coached before he went to Florida State. And, you know, I kind of hitched up to their wagon, you know, as I grew into a college football fan. So I like them. And we'll talk a little bit about them here in a few minutes as well. But the main course of the evening is Texas and Oklahoma heading to the SEC. Now, a few years before this, Missouri and Texas A&M left to join the SEC. So there's potentially 4 teams that have left the Big 12 in the past, 10 years now. Okay, to me, that does the conference in, because you're hanging your hat on Iowa State to stay good and hope that they're the draw. Well, I got to tell you, if you follow college football, they're not the draw in that conference, and they wouldn't be. So I rarely, and I say that with like maybe 1 out of 200 times do I ever agree with Paul Feinbaum. But I saw a quote from Paul Feinbaum that said, if this happens, then the Big 12 is finished. And that's true in my opinion. It's done. They're going to leave. The conference is going to disband. And I think we're headed to super conferences, which is going to bring us to my next point News broke on Twitter earlier this afternoon that the SEC had reached out to a few other schools, namely Ohio State, Florida State, and a couple other schools that I'm actually looking for, and I don't know if I'll be able to pull it up right this minute or not. But that would make me sick to my stomach. I would probably puke a little and then swallow it down and then probably have to go ahead and puke some more if my beloved Noles headed for the SEC. I don't like the SEC. I don't know how I would take that. This is something that I'm not looking forward to entertaining if it were to happen. One model that I've seen posted on Spear Addicts, which is a Facebook group and a podcast that I follow that covers Florida State, Chris Frazier, the head of Spear Addicts, posted a model where West Virginia and Notre Dame become permanent fixtures in the ACC. And there is the 5 conferences, but they're way more in depth. And I'm actually pulling up that model right now. And this has a little bit more sense to it. So this model has the ACC, the Big 16, the Pac-16, the SEC, and the Big, I guess, 16. And in the ACC, you'd have Virginia, Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, West Virginia, Syracuse, Louisville, Boston College, and Pitt, and what they would call the North Division. And the South Division would be Florida State, Georgia Tech, Duke, Clemson, Miami, Wake Forest, NC State, North Carolina. So there would definitely be a realignment. The Big 16 would have Kansas and Iowa State, Iowa, Northwestern, Illinois, Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. The other side of the Big 16 would be Michigan, Ohio State, Rutgers, Indiana, Maryland, Purdue, Penn State, and Michigan State. I don't hate that either. This is a total college football, realignment. The Big 16, and this is where some AAC teams make their presence known. So the Mountain West goes bye-bye. The AAC goes bye-bye. And some of these teams join the Big 16. Colorado State Air Force, Oklahoma State Tulsa, Kansas State Wyoming, Cincinnati, and Memphis on one side. And I would think that, I guess maybe one disparity I would have here is that maybe one of those teams from the Big 16 that are out sort of in the Midwest would stay here, and Cincinnati would kind of go to the Big 16 as a regional thing. But the other side has Houston, Baylor, UCF, Southern Methodist, North Texas, Rice, Louisiana Tech, South Florida. That would put all the schools that get kind of hosed in these mid-major conferences in the boat to play for the national championship. Obviously, and this is a whole bag of cats we don't want to open right now, but this opens the playoff format, and you have to expand the playoff format if this was to take place. Carrying on with this model, like I said, I got this off of Spear Addicts. It's just something that was created and posted. It's fictional at this particular moment in time, Saturday night, July 24th. It's fictional at this moment, but it makes some sense. So we're going to go into the Pac-16. The North Division has Washington State, BYU, okay, leaving the Mountain West. Or excuse me, BYU is an independent, I believe. My fault. Utah, Oregon, Boise State, Colorado, and Oregon State. So a theme you see here is the rivals, like Oregon, Oregon State, Michigan, Michigan State, are all on the same side. So they play each other every year like they would perennially. I mean, this makes sense. On the south side of the Pac-16, you have USC, UCLA, Cal, Stanford. That's always a big game, going clear back to the 80s. Arizona, Arizona State, Texas Tech, and Texas Christian. Texas Christian leaving the Big 12 and moving to the Pac-16. There are some room for some thoughts on this. And then the mighty SEC brings up the rear. Last but not least, you might say. And this is with the two new teams that are, more than likely headed to the SEC in it. And it's funny how really everything stays the same. This is the one thing that really stood out to me, was nobody else joins the SEC other than Texas and Oklahoma. And get this, Texas, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M are all on the same side of the SEC, with Mississippi State, Arkansas, Missouri, LSU, and Ole Miss. The East Division of the SEC, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Vandy, Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky. If this were to happen, if this was to actually happen, college football, the face of college football, the landscape of college football would be forever changed from these days forward. And it would totally change the way we see everything. Okay, we could no longer look at Cincinnati as an AAC team. Okay, because legitimately they're in what we would call the super conferences, and it's just going to be, it wouldn't be a Power 5, it'd just be a super conferences. Super conferences, Power 5, whatever. This would be their chance for all these schools. The year that UCF ran the gauntlet and proclaimed themselves national champions. The year they went undefeated, got snubbed from the college football playoff in the year before, Mackenzie Milton got hurt. This would be their chance, because they would have to legitimately be considered for the college football playoff. And you have to expand it at this point. It has to be expanded. 4 teams just wouldn't cut it, because you couldn't pick. You would legitimately, at that point, have to have at least one representative from every super conference. And since there's 5 and you only got 4 spots, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that you have to expand the playoff format. And that's a whole nother topic to cover, if this actually were to happen. I'm still for the belief of giving these mid-majors a chance to play. And if that means putting in, a point system, where that was the big thing back when it was, the BCS, was percentage points got you the number 1 or the number 2 spot. You could potentially have one loss back when the BCS was raring to go and make it to the national championship because of percentage points, style points, the way you blew out a team, the way you look against big teams, things like that. You can still put that in to the college football playoff. That can be a thing. So it's a whole another road to go down. So I'm going to hold off on that until it becomes a little bit more relevant and a little bit more like it may happen. But if